The ammonia stung Anita's nostrils, but not as much as the salt from the sweat trickling into the raw split on her lip. She pressed the cold, damp cloth to the floor of the penthouse, her knuckles white against the plastic handle of the scrub brush. The elevator doors hissed open, spitting out a cold draft and the scent of expensive tobacco and rain. She didn't look up. She never looked up. But the heavy, rhythmic thud of hand-stitched leather shoes stopped exactly 3 inches from her bucket. A shadow loomed over her, blotting out the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway. "Who did that to your face?" The voice was a low vibration that seemed to rattle the very floorboards she was cleaning. Anita's heart kicked against her ribs. She kept her gaze locked on his shoes, polished, black, and reflecting her own terrified, bruised reflection. "I tripped, sir." The floors were wet. A gloved hand reached down. It didn't grab, it guided. 2 fingers under her chin forced her head back. She found herself staring into eyes the color of a winter sea, Su-Jin. The man who owned the building, the city, and the silence of every man in it. He didn't look at her like a maid, his eyes scanned the jagged purple welt on her cheek with the precision of a surgeon looking at a terminal wound. He didn't say a word. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and pressed it against her lip. When he pulled it away, the white fabric was stained crimson. Su-Jin's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek like a ticking bomb. He turned to the 2 giants standing behind him, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a death sentence. "Find out who lives with her. Bring me their hands." Anita's breath hitched. She reached out, her fingers staining the sleeve of his gray suit with soapy water. "No, please. It's just my brother. He's in trouble. Please don't hurt him." Su-Jin looked down at her small, trembling hand on his expensive wool. A flash of something, not anger, but a strange, dark hunger, crossed his face. He leaned down, his lips inches from her ear. "I'm not going to hurt him, Anita. I'm going to make sure he never has the strength to lift a finger against you again. But now, you owe me. And I always collect." He straightened up, leaving her shivering on the cold marble as the elevator doors closed on his icy silhouette. The next evening, the silence of Anita's apartment was shattered by a heavy thud against the wood. She crept to the door, her hand shaking as she peeked through the hole. There was no one there. But resting on the welcome mat was a heavy, black velvet box and a single, thornless white rose. Inside the box sat a key, not to a house, but to a high-security vault, and a note written in elegant, sharp calligraphy: "The debt is transferred. You no longer work for the building. You work for me." Anita clutched the key to her chest, the metal cold against her skin. She looked at her brother, Leo, passed out on the sofa with a bottle of cheap bourbon in his hand. She knew the men Leo owed money to, the Vaneck Syndicate, were predators. But she was starting to realize that by accepting Su-Jin's help, she had invited an apex predator into her living room. 2 nights later, the Vaneck men came. They didn't knock. The door splintered off its hinges, the wood screaming as it gave way. 3 men in leather jackets stormed in, their eyes wild with a desperate kind of greed. One grabbed Anita by the hair, yanking her head back until she saw stars. "Where's the money, Vance? Your brother's out of time." "I don't have it," she gasped, her hands clawing at his wrists. The man laughed, a dry, raspy sound. He pulled a serrated blade from his belt, the steel glinting under the dim yellow light of the kitchen. He pressed the tip of the knife just below her ear, right where the bruise from Su-Jin's touch was starting to fade. "Then we'll take it out of your skin." The air in the room suddenly turned freezing. The shadows in the hallway seemed to lengthen, stretching into the kitchen like living things. A soft, metallic click-clack echoed through the apartment, the sound of a safety being switched off. "I believe," a voice purred from the darkness of the hall, "that you are touching something that belongs to me." Su-Jin stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. He wore a black tactical turtleneck, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and ink. He held a suppressed pistol with the casual ease of a man holding a pen. The thugs froze, the blood draining from their faces. They recognized the ghost of Chicago. Moretti, the leader, stammered, his grip on Anita's hair loosening. "We didn't know. The girl, she's just a cleaner." "She was a cleaner," Su-Jin corrected, stepping forward. Each step was deliberate, predatory. "Now, she is my guest. And you are trespassing on my interests." He didn't wait for a reply. He fired. The sound was no louder than a cough, but the man holding Anita collapsed instantly, a neat hole appearing between his eyes. Anita fell to her knees, her ears ringing, her eyes wide as she watched the other two men scramble for their weapons. Su-Jin didn't flinch. He moved like a dancer, a blur of violence and precision. Within seconds, the kitchen was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of Anita and the soft drip of blood onto the linoleum. Su-Jin walked over to her, stepping over the bodies as if they were nothing more than discarded trash. He knelt in the blood, reaching out to tuck a stray hair behind her ear. His hands were steady, his expression completely calm. "I told you, Anita. I always collect on my debts." He stood up and offered her his hand. It was the same hand that had just taken 3 lives, yet it was the only thing in the world that felt solid. Anita looked at his palm, then back at the carnage in her kitchen. She knew that if she took his hand, the girl who cleaned floors would be gone forever. She would be entering a world of silk and slaughter, where the only thing more dangerous than Su-Jin's enemies was the way her heart thudded when he looked at her. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. Su-Jin gripped her hand with a strength that was both a promise and a cage. He pulled her to her feet and leaned in close, his breath warm against her cold skin. "Now," he whispered, "let's go home. We have a war to start." He led her toward the door, but as they reached the threshold, Anita stopped. She looked back at the vault key sitting on the counter, then at the dark hallway where a fourth shadow, one she hadn't noticed before, was moving slowly toward them, a gun raised and aimed directly at the back of Su-Jin's head. Anita opened her mouth to scream, but the shadow pulled the trigger. This is the end of Chapter 1. To unlock the next chapter and see if the Protector survives the assassin's bullet, you must act. If you believe that a woman who has spent her life in the shadows deserves a hero who will bleed for her, hit the like button and subscribe. Don't let Anita's story end in this hallway, show your support so her journey toward the light can continue. The gunshot echoed, but the sound was wrong, it was muffled, a wet thud followed by the clatter of steel on wood. Anita's scream died in her throat as she realized Su-Jin hadn't fallen. Instead, his enforcer, Luca, had emerged from the peripheral darkness, his blade buried in the assassin's throat before the trigger could be fully squeezed. The bullet had gone wide, shattering a ceramic vase inches from Anita's head. Su-Jin didn't even turn around. He kept his eyes locked on Anita, his thumb tracing her jawline as if the chaos behind him didn't exist. "The first lesson of my world, Anita," he whispered over the gurgling of the dying man, "is that I am never truly alone. And now, neither are you." Chapter 2, The Gilded Cage. The Su-Jin estate was a fortress of limestone and glass perched on the edge of Lake Michigan. For Anita, the transition was jarring. One day she was scrubbing grit from subway tiles, the next, she was walking on Persian rugs that cost more than her hometown. Su-Jin had moved her and a sober, terrified Leo into the East Wing. "You're a prisoner here," Leo hissed, pacing their private lounge. "He's a monster, Anita. Did you see his eyes when he killed those men? There was nothing there. Just static." Anita looked at the silk dress laid out on the bed, a deep, bruised plum color. "He saved us, Leo. The Vanecks would have sold me and buried you." "And what's his price?" Leo snapped. The answer came at dinner. The dining room was a cavern of shadows lit by a single crystal chandelier. Su-Jin sat at the head, his suit swapped for a crisp white shirt, the top buttons undone. He watched Anita pick at her truffle risotto. "You aren't eating," he noted. It wasn't a question, it was an observation of a flaw in his design. "I don't belong here, Su-Jin. I don't know how to be this." She gestured to the room. "You were never a maid, Anita. You were a woman hiding. I've simply removed the veil." He stood up and walked toward her, his presence closing the distance like a storm front. He leaned over her chair, his hands gripping the armrests, pinning her in place. "The Vanecks are still hunting. My rivals see you as a weakness. To the world, you are my prize. To me, you are the only thing in this city that isn't for sale." Before she could respond, the heavy oak doors burst open. Luca appeared, his face tight. "Boss. The docks. Shipment 44 was hit. They didn't take the cargo. They burned it. And they left a message." Su-Jin's expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What message?" Luca held up a scorched piece of fabric. It was a fragment of a blue maid's uniform, the one Anita had been wearing the night they met. Cliffhanger, Su-Jin turned to Anita, his eyes darkening to obsidian. "They aren't declaring war on my business," he whispered. "They're declaring war on you." Chapter 3, The Ghost's Gambit. The vibe shifted from luxury to lockdown. Su-Jin disappeared into the war room for 3 days. Anita was forbidden from leaving the East Wing, but the silence was louder than the gunfire. She spent her hours exploring the library, finding books on Renaissance art and military strategy, Su-Jin's mind mapped in ink and paper. On the 4th night, the power went out. The estate plunged into a suffocating black. Anita's breath hitched. She reached for the heavy brass lamp on the desk, her fingers trembling. "Leo," she called out. No answer. She felt a hand clap over her mouth. It was cold, smelling of rain and gunpowder. She thrashed, but a familiar voice hissed into her ear. "Don't move." It was Su-Jin. He was drenched, a smear of blood across his forehead. He pulled her into the shadows of a bookshelf just as the flashlights of intruders began to sweep the hallway outside. "They breached the perimeter," Su-Jin whispered, his chest heaving against her back. "They have Leo. If we move now, we can get to the panic room. We can't leave him." Anita choked out against his palm. "I'm not leaving him. I'm using him." Su-Jin's voice was devoid of emotion. "They want a trade. You for the boy. They're waiting in the foyer." Anita pulled away, staring at him through the dark. "You're going to give me to them?" Su-Jin grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Or are you still the girl who hides her face in a bucket?" Cliffhanger, he handed her a small, cold object. A Derringer pistol. "If I fail, don't let them take you alive." Chapter 4, The Foyer of Fire. The foyer was an arena. 3 Vaneck soldiers held a bloodied Leo center stage. The lead mercenary, a man named Merrick with a jagged scar across his throat, grinned as Su-Jin and Anita emerged from the shadows. "The Great Ghost, surrendering for a girl," Merrick mocked, his rifle leveled at Leo's head. "The underworld won't believe it." "The underworld believes what I tell them," Su-Jin said, his voice steady as he stepped forward, hands raised. Anita walked beside him, her heart a drumbeat of terror. "The girl for the boy." "Move," Merrick commanded. As Anita stepped toward the mercenaries, she saw the subtle twitch in Su-Jin's jaw. It was the signal. She didn't move toward Merrick, she dropped to the floor. The ceiling skylight shattered in a rain of glass. Su-Jin's snipers, positioned on the roof, opened fire. But Merrick was fast. He lunged for Anita, his hand wrapping around her throat as a human shield. "Cease fire. Su-Jin roared, his composure finally breaking. His eyes were wide, panicked, a look no one had ever seen on the ghost. Merrick backed toward the door, dragging Anita with him. You missed one detail, Moretti. I don't care about the boy. I just wanted to see you bleed. He pressed his pistol to Anita's temple. Cliffhanger, a heavy explosion rocked the front of the house. The doors didn't just open, they vanished in a fireball. Chapter 5, The Price of Loyalty. Through the smoke, a new player emerged. It wasn't the police. It was the council, the elder heads of the 5 families who governed the city's crime. They were tired of Su-Jin's private war. Enough, the eldest, a man named Silvio, shouted. His men surrounded both Su-Jin and the Vaneck remnants. This girl is a contagion. She has made the ghost weak. She has made the Vanecks reckless. Silvio looked at Su-Jin. Kill her now, Su-Jin. Prove your loyalty to the council, and we will wipe the Vanecks from the map for you. Refuse, and you both die in this foyer. Su-Jin stood amidst the glass and smoke. He looked at Leo, crawling away in the corner. He looked at Anita, held by a trembling Merrick. Then he looked at the council. He didn't reach for his gun. He walked over to Silvio, leaning in close. You think she's my weakness? Su-Jin asked, his voice a low, terrifying growl. She's the only reason I haven't burned this entire city to the ground yet. If you touch her, you aren't starting a war. You're starting an apocalypse. Silvio sneered. Then you've chosen. He raised his hand to signal his executioners. Cliffhanger, Anita didn't wait. She remembered the weight in her pocket. She pulled the derringer and fired, not at Merrick, but at the gas line of the decorative fireplace behind the council. Chapter 6, The Great Escape. The explosion provided the distraction they needed. In the chaos of fire and screaming, Su-Jin scooped Anita up and bolted for the service tunnels he had installed years ago, tunnels even Luca didn't know about. They emerged blocks away in a nondescript garage. A black SUV sat idling. Where's Leo? Anita gasped, her face blackened by soot. Luca has him. He's headed for the safe house in Wisconsin, Su-Jin said, shoving her into the passenger seat. He climbed in and floored it, the tires screaming. Why did you do it? Anita asked, staring at the man who had just defied the most powerful men in the country for her. You lost everything. Your estate, your standing, your ghost title. All for a maid. Su-Jin didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I didn't lose anything I wanted to keep. I've spent 15 years building a throne made of bones, Anita. I'm tired of sitting on it alone. Cliffhanger, he checked the rearview mirror. 3 sets of headlights appeared, closing the gap. But they aren't going to let us just drive into the sunset. Chapter 7, The Bridge of Sighs. The high-speed chase led them to the outskirts of the city, toward the old industrial bridge. The council's cars were ruthless, ramming the SUV, trying to force them over the edge into the icy river below. Hold on. Su-Jin yelled. He slammed the brakes, causing the lead car to overshoot them. He then spun the wheel, T-boning the second car into the bridge railing. But the third car didn't stop. It accelerated, slamming into Su-Jin's door. The SUV spun, flipping twice before sliding to a halt on its roof, inches from the precipice. Anita woke up hanging upside down, the smell of gasoline filling the air. She looked over at Su-Jin. He was unconscious, blood sheeting down his face, his arm pinned under the crushed roof. Su-Jin. Wake up, she screamed. Footsteps approached on the asphalt. Silvio stepped into view, a silver-plated revolver in his hand. He looked down at the wreckage with a disgusted sigh. Such a waste of talent, Moretti. All for a girl who used to scrub my floors. He leveled the gun at Su-Jin's head. Cliffhanger. Anita struggled against her seatbelt, her fingers finding a jagged shard of glass on the floor. Chapter 8, The Transformation. Anita didn't scream this time. She didn't beg. She sliced through the seatbelt, dropped to the roof, and crawled out of the shattered window like a ghost herself. Silvio didn't see her until she was standing, the glass shard clutched in her fist. "Stay away from him," she said. Her voice wasn't trembling. It was cold. It was his voice. Silvio laughed. "Or what, little girl? You'll mop me to death?" He turned the gun toward her. Before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out. Not from Anita, and not from Silvio. Silvio's shoulder exploded in a spray of red. He fell back, howling. Su-Jin was leaning against the wreckage of the SUV, his eyes half closed, his hand shaking as he held his pistol. He had woken up just in time. "I told you," Su-Jin coughed, a crimson mist spray from his lips. "Apocalypse." He looked at Anita. "Finish it." Anita looked at the gun Su-Jin had dropped. She looked at Silvio, the man who represented every bully, every debt collector, and every shadow she had ever feared. She picked up the weapon. Cliffhanger. She pointed the gun at Silvio. The screen went black as a single shot echoed through the industrial park. Chapter 9, The Long Road Back. 6 months later. The ghost was dead. At least, that's what the headline said. The Moretti Empire had been dismantled, its assets seized or disappeared. In a small coastal town in Oregon, a woman named Anita worked in a garden, the soil under her fingernails a welcome change from the ammonia of her past. She looked up as a man limped toward her. He wore a simple linen shirt, his arm in a permanent brace, his face scarred but peaceful. "The lawyers called," Su-Jin said, handing her a glass of iced tea. "The transition is complete. The council members who survived the incident are in prison or in hiding. We're officially boring." Anita smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Boring is a luxury, Su-Jin." "It is," he agreed. "But there's one more thing." He handed her a folder. Inside were the deeds to a series of hotels across the country. "You always said you knew how to run a building better than the owners. Now you have 10. Cliffhanger. Anita's smile faded as she saw the last page of the folder. It wasn't a deed. It was a photo of Leo, standing in front of a frat house at UCLA, with a shadow in the background that looked hauntingly like a Vaneck soldier. Chapter 10, No Longer Invisible. Anita closed the folder. She looked at the horizon where the sun was setting over the Pacific. The itch of the past was still there, but she wasn't the girl with the bandage anymore. "He's being watched, isn't he?" she asked. Su-Jin sat beside her, taking her hand. His grip was still a promise. "He's being protected. By people who owe me their lives. He'll graduate, Anita. He'll have the life you scrubbed floors to give him." Anita looked at her own hands. They were no longer red from cleaning chemicals, they were strong. She looked at Su-Jin, the man who had destroyed his world to save hers. "I used to want to be invisible," she whispered. "I thought if no one saw me, no one could hurt me." Su-Jin turned her face toward his thumb tracing the faint, silvery scar on her cheek, the only remnant of her old life. "And now?" "Now," Anita said, her voice firm and clear, "I want them to see me coming." She leaned in and kissed him, a seal on a new kind of debt, one that wouldn't be paid in blood, but in years. They stood together as the stars came out, two ghosts who had finally found a way to live. If you believe that Anita and Su-Jin earned their peace after walking through hell, hit the like button. If you think a brother's safety is worth any price, subscribe so we can bring more stories of fierce protection and ultimate loyalty to life. Don't let their sacrifice be for nothing.